wholeness and freedom. Today on Healing Rain, I have Lisa Boucher, and she is an author, a speaker, and a registered nurse. God did a miracle in her life of helping her to overcome alcoholism. So, 33 years sober, she's telling her story and helping people to walk free of anxiety and depression. Today on Healing Rain, I have Lisa Boucher, and I'm happy to have you. And I love knowing that you love horses and you love to ride.
I do. Thank you for having
I love the fact too that you have been on a healing journey that has really made a difference, not in only in your life, but in the life of those that you help. So tell me, where did your healing journey begin?
It began back in my late 20s when I got sober. And my story was different in that, Sue, I didn't hit one of those devastating low bottoms. I hadn't had my twins yet. I have twin sons that are grown now, and I'm a Nini. So I quit drinking at a place in my life when most people are just revving up. But I had a different perspective in that my mother was an alcoholic, and I watched her hit a very low traumatic bottom. 25 years of prescription mismanagement by the doctors, 25 years of psychiatrists, hospitals, notable Cleveland Clinic, and misdiagnosing her. So it was a complete disaster. And in many ways, I feel like I have three siblings that we all kind of raised ourselves. My father was in the picture, but very poor coping skills of his own. And I think he just felt completely out of control by how out of control everything was. And so he was kind of, I called him the rageaholic in the family. So it was a
Mm,
really destructive dynamic, as you can imagine.
hmm
And yeah.
And so you made a choice early on. Okay, I've seen this path. I don't want to go down this path. And what did it take really to get free for you?
It was not that melodramatic. And I think it was, and this is where I believe God really stepped in, because I've been working with women in recovery now for 33 years. I've been sober 33 years. And so many are just in denial. We live in a very boozy culture. And the way the bar has been lowered is incredible to me that, there's when I was, doing my previous book, I was really immersed in what's going on and all these microbreweries, and people are taking their kids and sitting there for 3 hours complaining, that their kids aren't behaving. And it's just like this total disconnect of, you've got to be kidding me. They're sitting there
Mhm.
drinking, and let's just, basic, who's driving them home now? So from that perspective, it's just pure insanity. And it's, everyone's co-signing on everybody else's nonsense. And this is just the world that it is now. So I quit, though, like I said, in my late 20s when, here's what it took for me. I realized I'd been in and out of college for 10 years and hadn't finished my degree yet.
Wow.
So that was a problem. Everybody in their 20s drinks a lot in college, and you can really blend in. But I started to notice when my friends are graduating and moving on, and I'm still looking for the party. So that kind of, that wasn't enough by any stretch, because while I'm partying, I'm still in school. I'm always in school or I'm working, so it's not like I'm not productive, but I'm just not really getting, there's no forward momentum. So, I was a flight attendant. I moved to Dallas, and I'm, all over the place. And my drinking did start to escalate. And what really was the light bulb moment for me, there were a few of them, but one was I was working in a job in advertising and marketing for a hotel management company, and I did all their media buys and things like that. So I'm going, I'm always meeting with people for lunch from the radio stations and whatnot. And or a lot of them like to drink. So the lunches would turn into 2 and 3 hour ordeals. And it was not a problem until I'm going back to the office and closing my office door and taking a little cat nap to like recover from this 2.5 hour liquid lunch. So, people, those things you start to know like, okay, I don't think this is normal. But again, when you're in your 20s, you can get away with so much bad behavior and people just attribute it to youth or whatever. So somewhere in all of this, when the little seeds are being planted for me, my mother finally gets the appropriate help and she goes to rehab and she gets sober. And so she's 7 years sober when my drinking is crossing a line now. We moved back to Dayton from Dallas. I'm no longer flying. And I think it was when I looked at it from a very psychological perspective, I knew nothing but chaos. So, growing up in that, then the life I lived after my college years, very chaotic and partying and this and that, no structure. I never had any structure. And then I get this flight attendant job. So there's no structure. And it's fun and the irregular hours and all of, the travel and the craziness there, thrived on that. I think it's when, I got married and then my husband, we moved back to Dayton and he's trying to build a law practice. And I cannot cope with this 9 to 5 normalcy. It was just, I didn't know how to do it. And I went back to my marketing job. And that's when I think I crossed the line. And so, my life looked like a lot of other 20-year-olds, though. You meet your husband after work and you have drinks and you go to dinner. And that's really what it looked like. So from the outside, I did not have one person other than my mother saying, I think, you might want to look at this. And I believe it was a God thing that I actually chose to look at it. Because like I said, most people don't, there was no jail, DUI. I mean, none of that. It was just that internal falling apart and realizing like, this is not doing anything good for me. And I just think I'm done. And that was God. That is God. No other explanation for having the ability to see what I needed to see at such an early part in that journey, because 99.9% of the people that I've encountered along the way do not. They do not stop at the point that I did. And I think it's miraculous that I'm still sober, because I could have justified it a million different times that I was not that bad. But there's something that I just know genetically, I really believe in that genetic predisposition. I look at my family, my siblings, we could go on and on for hours about people, even just like I said, in my family, like my one sister is married to a physician and has a very wonderful life. And she's in the throes of alcoholism.
Wow.
But nobody notices it because there's all this affluency around her.
Right. So she can hide it.
Well, they all hide it. I mean, I see it all the time. And the kids, though, they're just as gravely impacted by it as the children in the impoverished neighborhoods. So I really, I like to talk about that because I want people to wake up. And just because you have a beautiful home and your cars and your whatever, your possessions, these kids are suffering. And, I work in psych. And so for a while I was with the children from 12 to 17. And so that was a piece that I really didn't have until I worked with them for a couple of years. And they talk to you, they're very open books. And here again, 90% or more of the children, this is just my observation, there's nothing wrong with these children at all. It's their environments that are so dysfunctional. And so they're looking for attention, or they're acting out, or any number, a plethora of reasons why. So it's a snowball soon.
It is. And so as you've worked with people to get free, what are some significant things, that in recovery helps people get free from drugs and alcohol?
I think the only thing personally that really frees people is a spiritual connection and connecting with others, because a lot of people isolate. There's a lot, I really didn't realize how much trauma there is in the world. There's a lot of trauma. And people are, like I said, it doesn't matter what environment, but working in, as a nurse, I did half of my career in the emergency room. And so, you're reading these charts. And then when I moved on to psych, and you're reading these charts and you start putting these pictures together. And I'm going, my God, so most of the people that are in addiction have some form of childhood trauma. And
A
I
lot
looked
of it. A lot
exactly.
of it.
And it doesn't have to be like I was traumatized as a child, because it was very unstable with my mother and just this complete chaos all the time. And
Mhm.
so I don't think the tendrils in the synapses in your brain do not form right. And so these children are traumatized. They grow up to be traumatized adults. They have no coping skills. And so they turn to drugs or alcohol or sex or food or any number of maladaptive coping skills. And
Yeah,
so
something to medicate the pain.
exactly, the self-medication. So some people do it with relationships. I mean, I've seen that where I'm married to number 5. And it's like, okay, the next one isn't going to be any different, because everywhere you go, there you are. That kind of, so it is about healing internally and fixing yourself first. But I think that spiritual connection is, and I think if I had to really boil it down even further for you, I think people who will not humble themselves and people who will not accept there might be a power bigger than them don't do well.
Yeah.
They just don't do well. And it doesn't matter. They don't necessarily have to believe in God, but it's hard for the people that are atheists. They get it. Some of them
Yeah.
do.
There's even that humility of knowing I need help. I
Right.
can't do this alone.
Right.
I need others to help me. Because that denial can last for years and years and years and be devastating.
And it does too. I mean, I have found people would rather have a mental health diagnosis than say they have a drug or alcohol problem and need to stop. They really would. They'd rather, and they go that route all the time. And the doctors cannot weed it out. They cannot sniff it out. They are complicit as far as I'm concerned, because they throw medication at these people when clearly the underlying issue is trauma segued into addiction. Treat that, because like it's very frustrating to see people being prescribed medication when nobody really knows what their baseline is. And you can't get an accurate baseline
because
until
they won't go off of drugs and alcohol long enough to get that freedom.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
even if you give them, even if the doctors would, tell them, give yourself 3 months off alcohol and drugs, go to rehab, and then reassess them for mental health issues. And a lot of time the depression is no longer there, or this anxiety they're going to now medicate with Klonopin or Ativan that's highly addictive, which makes no sense to me. But then, and these people just spiral further and further down. So it's tremendously sad what can happen.
It is sad. And I did not grow up in a world like you're describing. I didn't experience it. I had a dad who, read the Bible and said, "Hey, a little bit of this is really helpful." And he really modeled, like moderation. So I never saw him drunk or overdrink or anything like that, And that was my dad and my mother. But I became aware of the addiction and the addiction problem when we adopted 2 sons from Brazil that were 12 and 8, and they were born addicted to drugs. So in
Uh,
terms of even their brain development, they're
mm,
both special needs guys, because alcohol syndrome is that your brain does not fully develop,
right.
correctly. It doesn't even connect the right to the left side of the brain. So reasoning skills and impulsivity, and also disability in terms of, for Zeke, out of 100 percentile in math, he was like a 0.5%.
Oh, wow.
So just very severely impacted by the choices of their biological mom.
Mhm.
And then because I didn't understand it other than being a pastor that ministered to other people, it is a very intense world.
Mm.
And my first son died of a drug overdose.
Oh,
And
God.
my second son's still struggling up and down.
Sorry. Oh,
So anyway, that's my background so that I understand drug addiction, alcohol addiction more than I would have before, and the compassion for the families that are dealing with it.
yeah,
It's
it's
intense.
doubly rough
Yeah.
on them because you want to like shake them and say, why are they
Mm,
self-destructing?
mm,
Basically, is what it is. It's
mm.
someone is literally self-destructing before your eyes, and there's nothing you can do to make them stop it until they
Until
decide,
they decide.
right?
Yes, and we did interventions with both of them. I mean, we've
I,
been through it in terms of the treatment and the potentials. And so, if there's anyone listening and you're struggling with drug or alcohol addiction, or if you have family members, just know we're in no way pointing a finger. We are speaking with a voice of compassion that only God can help, in the sense of even humbling yourself and receiving help from others and receiving a healing community. Because one thing about drugs and alcohol is usually friendships are tied to the addiction, that
Mhm.
that those friendships are keeping you in it, so you're needing healthy friendships
Exactly.
to
You
help
have
you get
to,
free.
we say get rid of old people, places, and things. And some people are not willing to do that. Some people, it's very hard for them if they don't have a support system at all, and they have to go back to this very unhealthy environment. It is tough
Mhm.
for them. But there are places for people to go. There are sober living houses.
Absolutely.
There are
Absolutely.
I've seen people when they decide this is what I'm going to do, nothing stops them. And when
I
people,
agree.
I'm not ready, and because they get something out of the chaos. I mean, I can just tell you, when I got sober, normal life seemed like a little bit boring, and you start looking around, like, oh, can I stir up? And it took a while to realize, like, now I love my calm life, and it's, I love nature and I love the animals. And so I don't want that in my life, but it took a while for me to get there
Mhm.
where I was okay with it. And I've seen people start to do really well, and they just, they don't give themselves enough time. I started writing after I got sober. I went back to school and I finished 2 degrees. So I got that off, because I knew the mental capability was there. I just was never willing to apply myself, or when things got a little too hard, I bailed, kind of thing. So I was like dead set on, okay. So I finished nursing school. I finished my English degree. I finished school. And then I started writing. And,
And that gave you a future and a hope.
I found other things to do. And I
Mhm.
always kind of ponder how much wasted talent. We don't know that the next Steve Jobs isn't out there sitting in some bar, literally. And I mean that.
Mhm.
I think about that a lot. That's a whole show for you, Sue. The whole wasted brilliance
Yeah.
of people not tapping into their gifts,
Mhm.
or even
Mhm.
taking the time to try to discover, because it's been my
Yeah.
experience. People they end up finding an art gift or a language gift, or,
Yes.
they start
Yes.
furniture and now they're selling it and they've got this great little business, or
Mm-hmm.
they find it, but you can't find it. I mean, I really grieved the years I spent sitting on a bar stool because I like to be out and about. And that was only my 20s, but that was that decade when people are laying the foundation for their
Mm-hmm.
life. And I was just,
Mm-hmm.
and the years fly by,
They
and
do.
yeah.
They do.
Mhm. And you wake up at 30 going, yikes, I need to,
Yeah. There's got to be much more to life.
right.
Well, I love that you enjoy your animals. I know that your newest project, you really talk about letting loose of the reins, and you talk about some cowgirl stuff. So, in honor of that, I
I
brought my hat.
got my head on right.
So I don't get enough opportunity to wear my hat. I'll tell you how I got my hat. I was in Tennessee, and there was a group of pastors that were praying for my husband and I because we were moving to Texas after being pastors for 28 years in Nashville, Tennessee. And so they were praying for us, and the worship leader had this hat on, and God spoke to her heart that she was supposed to give me her hat,
Yes, so
and
that
she
we
loved her hat. And so I love it. And coming to Texas, there's such a westward
oh
expansion,
yeah.
so it always felt prophetic to me. So tell me, and by the way, you look great in your hat too.
Thank you. I had this was made by a famous hat maker. He happened to be down the street from Mackey. Look him up on the internet if you want a custom made hat. He was down the street from one of the ranches I was in Wyoming, and somebody had, I don't know, one of the Wranglers. And I'm like, oh, I love that hat. And they're like, hey, yeah, he's right down the street. So they came, they picked me up, took me back, the whole 9 yards. And like the next day, they delivered my hat. So that was kind of cool.
It's very fun.
But
So
no, I thought,
tell me what you've learned from these cattle rides that you've taken.
okay, so here's what started with my new book, Pray, Trust, Ride. It starts, I opened the book with, I had a horse growing up, and I think that saved me. I had a quarter horse, and I had an idyllic place to ride. Like it was unmatched, truly, just miles and miles of acreage and gorgeous and lakes and pine forest, and it was just beautiful. So the book opens up with, someone said most writers get all their material before they're 15. And I'm like, you know what? That is true, because yeah, it's really true. So I'm coming home, I'm riding, and there was a vicious thunderstorm. I mean, I've been in storms before, but this one was wicked scary. And it was the deluge of rain was like, I couldn't see. So I just hunkered down on my horse, literally let go of the reins, let him fly. I knew he knew how to get home. And I just didn't pick up the reins. I just held them so they didn't fall until I could see the light at the barn. So that whole visual of letting go is what this book is about.
Mm.
And there were several instances on like the first ranch I went to. These are not dude ranches where we're doing hidey ho downs. This was, I don't know how I found it on the internet, probably, but it was a rancher who literally needed help with cattle. Like there used to be a coalition of 25 ranchers. They were down to 9, and a lot of them had really big herds. So they relied on people who were willing to have like these grueling days and come help them bring the cattle to wherever they needed it to go. So that was my very first experience. And several of those stories end up in the book, because there were literally like moments when, and I feel like I'm a good rider. I've been riding since I've been 5 years old. I mean, I learned on a little Shetland pony, and then I rode a Tennessee Walker, and then I rode a quarter horse. So I've ridden a lot of different horses, and I've been riding since a kid. So it wasn't a matter of, I didn't know if I could ride, but I've never ridden in the mountains before. So we're in the Bighorn Mountains, and we're in terrain that is kind of scary. I hate heights. And literally, one of the rides, I turn my head this way, I'm kissing the mountain, and I look over
Mm,
this shoulder, and there's a sheer drop, and the footpath is no more than
wow.
yeah,
And
super.
you're on a horse that,
And I'm on a
you're not
horse
completely in
that I
control
don't
of.
really know. He's not my horse, so I don't really know him, but I do know these horses don't have a death wish.
Mhm.
And so there were like moments like that, literally, where I had to keep letting go of the reins and just stop wanting to steer because there was nothing I was going to do that was going to be helpful. So with things like that, or the time where these cattle are going through this river and the bank is getting really mucked up because the hooves, and they're having a hard time getting up. And the cowboys, these were for like hard drinking, hard riding cowboys. And they're on the other side of this river. So there's a steep embankment, go through the river, come up, and you're pushing these cattle. And I'm still on the other side of the river thinking, they've got to be crazy. I'm not doing this. And they're over there going, you have no choice. Right? I mean, we're out in the middle of
Mhm.
nowhere in Wyoming in the Big Horn Mountains, and these cows aren't stopping. So again, I had to literally let go of the reins and point the horse. I thought, he's done this before. I need to just let him do what he does. So that is kind of, and then the prayer of Jehoshaphat, where it talks about in 2 Chronicles, as a pastor, all this. But it's, God is power and might, and we just have to turn some things over. So that
Mhm.
premise, has been really helpful for me in my life. And I think it's been my experience from all of these hundreds of people that I've talked with and worked with and helped over the years. There's a lot of people with a lot of control issues, even over little minor things, that
Uh-huh.
it's like, gosh,
And
something.
and control and manipulation. I mean, it can just
I think I'm the
choke
it was
everything. We'll see how our
hard.
hair is.
Yeah, that
But
was fun.
control is awful, and it will squelch creativity, it'll squelch revival, it'll squelch all sorts of things. And you know, I love the fact that you're talking about that, because how how do you think control and anxiety, how do they go together? Talk
Oh,
about that.
I can talk about that. They are entwined because here's where anxiety lives in the future, right? It's not in the present, it's not right now. So, most people that are plagued with anxiety, it's about what's going to happen. They're afraid they're not going to get what they want, or they're afraid something isn't going to unfold the way they've already got it in their head. So, there's all this anxiety about what's going to happen, what are they going to think, or what are they going to say, or what, like all this projecting produces anxiety. And so it's really based in fear. And
Mhm.
here again, if you have a strong foundation or can change, I had to rewire my brain because like I had no coping skills. I didn't learn them from my mother's. Coping skill was put on some lipstick and go do your hair and you'll be fine. That was
That
it.
was her coping skill.
That was it. And that does not translate well to adult living, right? So it's, yeah. So, I think we really owe it to our children. And that's what I tried to teach my sons, that was I a perfect parent? No, but I was way better because I was always sober. And I think they were always a little afraid of me. So they didn't give me any trouble, really. Um, And I taught him to pray. And my one son, he says that all the time. He says, Mom, I'm glad you taught us to pray. Because, when they'd call me from college, they both played Division I football and they had a lot of stress. And they went to Miami University in Ohio. So they had to maintain, because they got into the business school and they had to maintain their GPA and all of this stuff. So they had, a lot of stress. And when they'd call, I always talked about, well, how are you going to handle that? What are your coping skills? What are you going to do about it? And I like that they're both now golfers. So they would do yoga. They'd go for a jog or,
Things
pray.
that relieve stress. Yeah.
Right, right. You have to exercise is a great coping skill. And
It
prayer,
is.
I mean, and nature. I think with those three, you can pretty much handle whatever comes down
Mhm.
the pike. But kids are not being taught these very simple fundamentals.
Mhm. And um, the goodness of God will drive out fear of the future. When you really, really, really deep down know that like God is good and you let go of the outcomes that you think, you
Right.
know, maybe, what you want, but you let go of the outcomes and you anchor yourself on the goodness of God. Like he is good. And you see enough life where even through the ups and downs, God was good to you and that God cared for you. When I think about letting go of reins, part of what I'm doing is really I'm putting the reins in the hands of God,
Right.
you know. And it's like even in the horse where he's done this before. I know that God knows the future way better than I do. I mean, he really does. And God likes to take these zigzags in our life. We might be going this way and then we're going this way, but he likes that. I mean, I think sometimes we get the idea of God that he's like a linear, but really he's the God of the zigzag. And it's
Yes.
often in those twists and turns that you
Right.
really get to know who God is. And but I think the knowledge of the goodness of God and thanksgiving drives away anxiety and the desire to control.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And that's
Yeah.
hard for some people to grasp, that concept too. But I do
Mhm.
think things are going to shift. And that's why I think I was shifting to with this book is that, it seems like our world's getting so secular. And I was like, okay, I just felt like this. And I don't know, I think a lot of people are feeling this calling from God saying, all of you everyday people, I want you to start raising your voices. And that's kind of the message that I started to get before I started Pray, Trust, Ride. I'm like, I think he wants me to talk about him because there's so many people out there bashing him. Where are those of us who love God and want to like honor him and lift him up in the collective conversation? And so I kind of feel like that is my next mission. I mean, how that unfolds, I don't really know, but that's what I want to try to do. I think that's the purpose for why I chose to write this little book. And I wanted it to be small because I know people are distracted. And I didn't want, sometimes you look at a big book and like, I know a lot of people that aren't really readers and they look at 300 pages like it's insurmountable. So I'm picturing, and when I was on the last ride, I was in Montana in the end of August. I met a couple girls out there, and now they were young, 17 and 14, and we had some great conversations about social media and their stress and anxiety because of
Mm.
social media. So I had the advanced reader copies, and they read it, and they loved it, because they were like, "Oh, this will help me," because there's like a page you can open where there's just a paragraph. And the one little girl, she was adorable, and she's going to do cross country running. And she said, I guess there was some drama with friends and all that. I don't know. I'm getting a feeling that it's a little different with girls. I did boys. We didn't have all that drama.
Yeah, yeah,
I've
that's
got two
true.
granddaughters now, and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to start preaching to them though right now, like, you be nice, because all I'm hearing from these girls is that girls are so mean. I'm like, why is
Mhm.
that? Why do
Mhm.
you think that is?
Well, I think jealousy hides behind concern, and that young females have a lot of trouble with jealousy.
Mm.
But we have four girls and then adopted two sons, and those girls are so close to each other. They're all not all, three of them are having babies, and so I
Oh,
have eight grandchildren. I
oh,
mean,
that's
I
awesome.
am a happy Mimi, and they are doing such a great job, but they're also so close to each other.
That's
But
wonderful.
I know it's an amazing thing. So I often think of it like this, God has a purpose and a plan. And I think one of the things that he's put on women is the ability to form really close, intimate relationships. Whereas the enemy wants the opposite. The enemy wants to divide. The enemy wants a type of jealousy that comes up that women are mean to each other. And it's like with men, they deal with things being different. They just compete and then they're fine, okay, but women have trouble in this area. And I was recently in Estonia and I was leading a women's event for really most of them in the room were refugees that were in Estonia because of the war between Ukraine and Russia. So, I mean, they weren't planning to come. But I'm leading this group, and I felt God prompt me to just talk about jealousy. And there was this breakthrough in the room as women after woman kind of confessed their jealousy, and reconciled. Um, and only God can do stuff like that. I mean, it was really, really powerful, and God showed up.
That's really interesting. That's very,
Yeah. 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 And the thing about jealousy is that usually you don't realize you're jealous. It's hiding behind something. You're concerned about this or you're angry about this because jealousy just hides. But
yeah.
when we realize that and we guard our hearts from that, then we can build the best friendships because we're honoring, the uniqueness and the power and the giftedness in the other person.
Well, I think that's easier as women get older, but those teenage years, like these two
It
gals,
is. It's brutal.
they were struggling because
It's brutal.
the 17-year-old, she was like, I thought these girls were my friends and that, all of that sort of stuff that I was like, oh, I felt so bad for them. So
Oh, I
they were
know.
really glad that the internet was terrible. And they were like, oh, it's kind of freeing to not have to be connected and worrying about anything. So I think social media is really not healthy for
It's
kids.
a real problem. Hey, I just had one of the guests that came on talked about taking a 3-day silence fast.
Mm.
When you're wanting to get a breakthrough, when you're wanting to hear God. And I was thinking about that because it, like with that age group, the social media, the phone, where you constantly have noise. I bet getting on that cattle ride, like blocked out all the other noises that you could get silent before God, so to speak, and hear things in a receptive way. And I think it's really important that we silence those voices and that that we're still and that we know that he is God.
Silence is paramount. And I think nature has been, oh, like such medicine. And I know we're lucky. I live not far from Bard, Kentucky. And I'm sure you're
Mm.
familiar with Thomas Merton, and that's where he lived at that Trappist monastery. And I've gone there several times by myself, 4 days. It's a silent monastery, and
I have not been there, but I have heard about it.
I love it.
Was it powerful?
I thought it was I had a very spiritual experience the first time I went. And I did like, I can't, the noise that silverware makes is incredible when no one's, honestly, that just kind of blew me away. I'm like, I don't realize how loud it can be. I'm sad to say, even that is changing because I don't know, people, I guess, get mad with the way because they're normally vegetarian. And then, they had to change it because people complain, stuff like that. I'm like, oh my goodness. But so I pick times when I don't think anybody will go, like when it's crappy weather, like in November. And I love it. I mean, it's just quiet and
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
The one time I went, I did like I got up for Vespers and Lauds and everything, 3 in the morning. I did the exact schedule of the monks.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was very interesting. I like that stuff. So maybe that's why I like nature and the horses.
Yeah. Well, and just being able to listen, to calm the and
Mhm,
quiet the loudness of the world and
mhm.
listen. Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful having you on Healing Rain. Is there anything else that you would like the Healing Rain listeners to know from you?
I would just tell them to find whatever spiritual connection they can, grab onto that, and try not to live in the future because that does cause so many people so much anxiety. And hopefully, they can find a little bit more peaceful way to get through the day. Right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
it
yeah,
really,
and I
really is.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're on Healing Rain and Healing Rain listener, I just want to say to you, God's got it. And if you've struggled with control issues or you've struggled with anxiety, depression, or anything we talked about, drugs, alcohol, or have someone that you love that struggled, I want to encourage you that there's always hope. And I want to encourage you to anchor your hope, your expectation, your anticipation, anchor it on the person of God. He is faithful. He never changes. He never leaves you. He never forsakes you. And knowing that He's good can give you a sense of peace and joy for your daily life.